This is our last executive advisory panel of the Health, Wellbeing and Vulnerable People of the Year. I think that I've really enjoyed our panel meetings so far, and I think they're proving really useful. In terms of looking ahead, we'll keep working with you to make sure that we're bringing things that are relevant and interesting and worth discussing. Welcome to Carol, who is here to talk to us about the Adult Learning Programme. Carol, we've got two items on the agenda today, yours and the budget. And as you can probably imagine, the budget will take up quite a bit of discussion.
Absolutely fine, yes.
So rather than taking you second, we'll take your paper first, so that you can
That's absolutely fine.
You can then go once you've done.
Oh yes, it's my many meetings, and of course I'm seeing you. I'm seeing you later, Helen, as well.
I know.
This afternoon, twice in one day.
Yes, exactly.
Which is great. Thank you. Just for other members who might be interested to know that Helen is on our performance board for the Adult Learning Service and Apprenticeships and the Study Programme, which is a joint board with West Northampton. It's our first meeting this afternoon, so it's really nice to see Helen and everybody this morning as well. Okay, so thank you very much.
Sorry, hang on, Carol.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. We'll take yours before the budget proposals. If we could just quickly go through the other little bits we have to.
Oh yes, certainly. Yeah, that's fine. I'll go on mute again.
So the other thing I just wanted to say is, because this is a virtual meeting, usually I allow the meeting to run really to just flow and people to speak as they want to speak. I think it might be easier if people put their hands up when they want to speak today. We'll see how it goes. It's quite a small group, so it might, let's start with hands up and see how it goes, just so that we can manage the meeting well. Apologies, we have apologies from Councillor Harrington. I don't think we have any others, do we, Francesca? Okay. Members' declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest today? No, everybody's quiet, so that is fine. And then we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of October. Has everybody now managed to see those, and are there any corrections or issues with those minutes? That's all quiet. So can I take that they're approved? Hands up, everyone. Excellent. And then the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of December. You should now have received those. And again, if there are any comments or corrections, there are not. So if those could be accepted as correct, accurate record. Thank you. Hands up. Lovely. So we now move on to Carol. So over to you, Carol.
Just remember to take myself off mute. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. Lucy suggested that I came to talk to this group because it is really positive that the Adult Learning Service sits within the public health team, because we believe that we really support public health outcomes. I do actually sit on the Education, Employment and Skills panel as well, because of course we are all about education, but I think it's very positive with the community learning provision that we actually work with you as well. So what I'm doing today is just going through some slides to give you a kind of overview of what actually happens in the Adult Learning Service and what we do and how we do it. And it is very general. It's a whistle-stop tour. I won't talk very much because I appreciate your second item is really much more complex. And I'm really happy to talk to people outside the meeting. And in my previous meetings with Helen, she's also very kindly said that she's happy to talk to members on our behalf as well, because of her understanding of our service. So Francesca's very kindly going to share some slides for me, and I'll just whistle stop through those. And of course, that's always quite peculiar online, isn't it? Because you feel like you're just talking to a screen. So I'll keep an eye open for hands, but you might want to ask questions at the end and have a conversation as well. It's entirely up to you. So anyway, as you can see, I'm Carol Berevitz. I'm a service manager. And as you'll see with this slide, Northamptonshire is the lead provider for all training for apprenticeships, the study programme and adult learning. But our grant is actually for North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. So that's what is on the logo. And also, of course, we're in public health. So if I can have the next slide, Francesca, thank you. Excuse me. Right, okay, so I need to move your faces out of the way so I can see my slide. Think of that. Okay, so I'm just starting off with some facts. I won't talk too much because you can look at these afterwards. But I think what's really important for everybody to remember, and of course our residents often think it is funded by their council tax, it is actually a grant from the Education Skills Funding Agency, which of course is part of the Department for Education. So we actually get 2.4 million a year in our grant. It can vary from year to year, but that's not an insignificant amount of money to actually have to spend on the residents of this county. We also make fee income. And I've given you an idea of how much money we make in a normal year. Of course, last year was a very unusual year and we delivered most of our provision online and we didn't charge. We used our grant to subsidise that support rather than try and make money out of it. And just to give you a flavour, in the last academic year, we made about 22,000 in a whole year charging for courses. But already since September this year, we've probably made about 150,000 because we've returned face-to-face and started charging tuition fees for about 50% of our provision. Most of our funding is on something called non-accredited community learning. And that's the kind of stuff that isn't delivered by colleges. So we, oh, sorry, something's popping up on my screen. So yes, so anyway, so the 2.1 million is actually spent on courses for adults in the community which do not gain qualifications. So we also have a small qualifications programme, and that focuses on basic skills. Again, we're not trying to mirror what the colleges do. So it's very much supporting adults in the community to gain English, Maths, ESOL basic qualifications. In a normal year, we get 5,000 learners and about 7,000 enrolments. Last year wasn't a normal year. We got about 1,000 learners, but in a general year, that's how many people we actually reach out to. And the fact that we get more enrolments means that, of course, most people do more than one course with us. I think what's important to emphasise, particularly for this panel, is that more than 50% of our courses are targeted and they're free for learners. That's what our grant is spent on, and I'm going to explain a bit more about that in a minute. For courses that we do charge a fee for, they're £5.50 an hour, and they are still subsidised by the grant, and we've got a generous remitted fees policy. These are just facts. I know you can read them yourselves, but I'm just trying to kind of sort of emphasise the background behind it. So the other thing to remember is that we are community-based. Quite a lot of adult learning providers in local authorities have got their own bases, but we haven't got our own venues. And in normal times, we kind of hire rooms in schools, which of course perhaps haven't always been so keen to have us back this year yet. But lots of stuff goes on in secondary schools, primary schools, libraries. And then the other thing, of course, is that we are Ofsted regulated. Because we get our money from the Education and Skills Funding Agency, it is really deemed to be part of that DFE offer for post-19 people in the county. And so Ofsted come and have a look at what we're doing. And in our last inspection, which was in September 2016, I'm pleased to say we were a grade 2 provider. So that's some facts about us. So I'm just whistle stopping through this because I know that I can talk to you in more detail another time. So if I could have the next slide, please, Francesca. These are the kind of community learning courses we do, and most of you are probably familiar with the brochure that comes through your door, which is our mainstream adult education programme. And one of the things we're really pleased about is that because we're in the Public Health Directory, we can offer all kinds of courses like French for beginners, Spanish, yoga, swimming, watercolour painting, dance, lots and lots of things that don't necessarily lead to qualifications, but do support well-being. And that evening class programme, an adult, well, it happens in the daytime as well, but it's mainly in the evenings, where people pay for those courses. We believe that we can justify subsidising it because it does actually support people's well-being and their mental health. Certainly lots of feedback we've had in the last year or so is that for many people, doing their French evening class has actually really enabled them to make new friends, stopped isolation. We've had some people who've told us that certainly during COVID, when they logged on to their evening class, it was the only time they actually spoke to people during the week. So it is quite a powerful thing, I think, in terms of engaging people who are lonely. We have to say we do have quite a lot of older people access that programme as well, which is so important. We also have what we call a family learning programme, and that is targeted at parents who haven't got level 2 qualifications. And by that, I mean qualifications up to a grade C in English and maths, or grade 4 as it is now. So those courses are in partnership with schools, and we talk to heads, so we talk to the family workers, and they target parents for us who would benefit from doing some courses either with their children or without their children, where they improve their English and maths, or indeed their kind of ESOL skills. So they are in areas that are identified as areas of social deprivation. So they're not everywhere, they're not for everybody, but they are very much kind of focusing on supporting parents and carers to support their children. And so that is actually a very popular programme, and that is free. And certainly what we're doing at the moment is encouraging kind of the idea of family resilience. So we do lots of things like cookery, or arts and crafts, or outings to country parks. And we work closely with our colleagues in the public health team to offer kind of family cookery courses, for example, which can support their agenda about combating childhood obesity. So it is a powerful programme. I'm whistling through because I just think that'd be easier. Our neighbourhood learning programme is actually an engagement programme, and that again is in a partnership with the voluntary sector, and that targets adults in areas of identified social deprivation to encourage them to return to learning, and to perhaps improve their IT skills, improve their employability skills, do some English and maths maybe, but very much a light touch, short course where people often just come and have a cup of coffee and talk about what they would like to do. And arts and crafts is a very valuable vehicle in terms of encouraging people to come and do something nice. So that was quite challenging during the pandemic, because a lot of the community centres closed, and those kind of learners didn't necessarily, or were not able to actually access our courses online. So we're really pleased this term we have been able to get back into community centres and do some really nice things with some of those individuals, and support them and hopefully move them on to other provision. Our Learn to Be programme is a programme which supports adults that are experiencing poor mental health. And again, that programme is free too, and that indeed is a programme that really does link into the public health agenda in terms of supporting adults with mental health needs, and is very powerful in terms of the fact that people come and often do singing or drama or watercolour painting, or perhaps some courses on anger management or sleep management, or ways to tackle their anxiety or depression in a kind of supportive atmosphere. And we believe that the public health agenda, of course, is so much about prevention. And so we really feel that obviously, if people are seriously unwell with a mental health need, we're not the experts in terms of supporting their medical needs, but we can support them in terms of helping them to kind of manage anxiety or their depression, or signpost them to a medical expert. What our Here For You programme is a similar kind of programme which people from family learning, neighbourhood learning, or Learn to Be could progress onto, where they are free adult education classes, often supporting people with a vulnerability, perhaps adults who've got a learning disability. And again, these are very supportive courses where, you know, people aren't working towards qualifications, they're very friendly. They are obviously Ofsted regulated, so we embed messages about the prevent agenda, about, you know, we're expected to support messages about British values and about English and maths, improving their IT skills. But the big focus on all our community learning courses is to focus on adults in the community and make sure that they have a chance to take what's called a first step back into learning. So that's a kind of, you know, explanation of that community learning provision. And then if we could go on to the next slide. We do offer what are called skills courses, and they are courses that lead to qualifications. We offer English and maths functional skills. Again, we try not to duplicate what the colleges are doing, but for those of you who obviously know your own areas very well, it can be quite a challenge sometimes to get to an FE college if you live somewhere where there's not a very good bus route and you haven't got a car, or if you perhaps feel very nervous about going into a big building where there's lots of 16-year-olds about. So they are very much supporting people in the community who have perhaps done some community learning first and want to improve their English and maths. And once they've done functional skills with us, they can then perhaps move on to college to do a GCSE. We do offer courses English for speakers of other languages. We do ESOL. Interestingly enough, that has been in the West, but we have been doing and are continuing to do some ESOL courses for Afghan refugees in the two hotels in Northampton and near Daventry. So that's quite powerful. But a lot of our ESOL actually happens in schools where teachers have contacted us to say there's children in the school where, of course, they're learning English, but their parents or their mothers particularly are struggling to learn English. So we'll go into schools and teach English to those parents. And again, they can move towards getting qualifications, which is very valuable when you want to move on to get a job or move on to a course at college. The Essential Digital Skills Qualification is something else we offer, and I'm sure you're aware that one of the challenges of the pandemic was digital inclusion. We find that some of the learners that we work with the most hard to reach really struggle with IT skills. We do courses in job centres where people have to kind of, do their kind of claims online now for universal credit, and they haven't got laptops at home, and they really struggle to kind of get on with IT. And of course, nearly every job needs you to have IT skills now. So that's something that we offer as a qualification, although we do offer lots of IT courses as well, which don't lead to qualification, that first step back into it. And of course, the other thing we find is that many of our learners have not got a laptop. So we have got the funding and we have lent laptops to our learners to enable them to carry on studying. We found during the first and second lockdown, for example, lots of families just had the one laptop. So they had to stop their courses with us because when the schools closed, their children quite understandably needed to use the laptop. So it is a real challenge for a lot of families, I think, to have to actually either have the digital skills or have access to IT equipment. We offer first aid, that's really popular, people like doing that. We've offered a peer mentoring course, which has been focused on those adults, particularly on the Learn to Be programme, whereas when they get better and they want to support their peers, is a way of teaching them and helping them to understand the best way to support people who've got a mental health need through your own lived experience. But sometimes if you have a qualification, it can enable you to move on to other things. We do mental health first aid awareness as well. And in fact, we are offering that to counsellors in the West. And I'm going to talk to Helen about whether there'll be counsellors in the North who'd be interested in that as well. It's quite a big thing. I think everybody's trying to understand more about mental health. We do some employability courses on food safety, health and safety, the kind of sort of basic courses which perhaps enable people to get jobs. One of the things we've done in the past, for example, is we've had parents on family learning courses who have volunteered in breakfast clubs or after school clubs. And if they get a food safety qualification, they can help make the breakfasts, and then they've got more employability skills to perhaps move on to a paid job as a dinner lady or something, So that kind of thing is kind of all about progressing people on who perhaps haven't got higher level skills qualifications. So if I could have the next slide, please. I'm conscious I'm talking really fast. And of course, I can just see the screen, not anybody's face. It's so strange, isn't it, when you haven't got the kind of eye contact with people when you're talking. Up until now, we've kind of linked everything we've done to Health and Wellbeing Board outcomes, because we think what the Health and Wellbeing Board was saying about public health and about health generally was really supporting what we were doing. Every child gets the best start in life. Obviously, that linked into our family learning programme. Taking responsibility and making informed choices, that certainly supported those adults on our neighbourhood learning programme, or indeed any other programme, to think about what they should do next and taking responsibility for their learning and thinking how they could improve their life through learning anything. And then promoting independence and quality of life for older adults is a big thing for us. We think it's really important as part of the 5 ways to wellbeing that continuing to learn can improve your own quality of life and keep you kind of stimulated and interested and kind of positive about life. And we offer remitted fees, kind of lower fees for those adults who are 66 or over if they want to access our evening class programme. And creating an environment for all people to flourish. Now, we're passionate that education can make a real difference to people. People can flourish once they learn something new. We do things like cake decorating courses, for example. We've had some people who have then gone on to set up their own business selling cakes. People flourish once they learn how to do things. And I know that you will know that, but we are really passionate about those concepts. The Health and Wellbeing Board, of course, outcomes finished in 2020. So if I could have the next slide, please, Francesca. We are kind of underpinning our strategy by those concepts still, but we're also thinking about the kind of things that are coming through in the messages from public health now about health inequalities, because we do believe also that our adult learning service can actually kind of combat those kind of issues regarding health inequalities, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The kind of things that cause those are the different experiences of the wider determinants of health, differences in health behaviours and sort of psychosocial factors. So, for example, in the past, we would kind of embed conversations perhaps on our cookery courses about eating healthily, the benefits of perhaps cooking from scratch. We often find that there are families or other people indeed who are accessing food banks and they're getting food from food banks, but they don't necessarily know how to cook it. So, and then of course, if people are eating lots of kind of processed food or what have you, that can have an impact on their health. So we kind of think that we can support that agenda in the public health team. And for those of you, I'm sure you're all kind of aware, a lot of work is going on at the moment about prevention and how we can combat the fact that people's life expectancy and their health is seriously impacted if they don't lead a healthy lifestyle. So and the next slide, please. It's just a kind of final message. So as I said, this is a fast whistle stop tour, and then I'm really happy to take some questions. It's important to realise that we will remain a lead authority. I'm sure you're aware that the public health team is going to be disaggregated into two. We will stay in North Northamptonshire, and the reason we're staying in North Northamptonshire is because it was the decision of our funders to transfer the funding from NCC to just one lead authority, and that was decided to be North Northamptonshire. But we will be delivering to both, and that is based on need. And having quite a lot of conversations at the moment regarding our inter-authority agreement about how that money will be spent in the North and the West. The kind of expectations of our funding is that most of it does go on adults who have got particular needs in terms of their health or their mental health, their physical health. Whether they're on benefits, whether they're in a group that's perhaps identified as needing more support. So, for example, historically, we haven't really offered neighbourhood learning in deprived communities in South Northamptonshire. That's not to say we won't be doing work in South Northamptonshire, but if we look at the statistics, obviously areas of Corby, areas of Kettering, areas of Northampton, I think it's important, as it's public money, that we provide a lot of free courses in those wards where there is more need. So and I just wanted to emphasise again, we are Ofsted regulated, and that is challenging. That is hard work, and I think sometimes our learners don't necessarily understand that it's not a club. They're not just. We want them to have a nice time. We want them to enjoy themselves, but it is a high quality education offer. Once or twice during the pandemic, we were teaching online, and we noticed one or two people, for example, were sipping on a glass of wine, and we thought, well, I don't think you should really be doing this. You wouldn't be doing this if you were in the classroom. So we are also aware, of course, that we are due an Ofsted inspection, and we're likely to be inspected, I think, within the next year or so. So obviously there is that rigour and that quality assurance in terms of what we're actually delivering. And I think that is a good thing, but of course it is an extra pressure, especially in these challenging times. So that was all really I was going to say this morning in terms of the kind of priorities of this panel. Lucy felt it would be useful for you to understand what adult learning is about, and I'm more than happy to take some questions now, if that helps. Very fast talking.
Thanks so much, Carol. That was a real whistle-stop tour, but I think it was really nice and comprehensive and quite clearly delivered. So I think that gives people a really good idea of what's going on in adult learning. King has his hand up, so I'll go to King. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll leave them and see if they're asked by others.
Yeah,
and
that's fine. Yeah,
I'll come back to my questions if they're not brought up by others. So, Councillor Lewal, King.
Thank you, and thank you, Carol, as well. What a wonderful presentation. The plethora of fantastic.
Very strange doing it online.
Absolutely, but there's a lot of fantastic stuff in there. I think it's just absolutely tremendous that we've got that in our county, opportunities for adults and families to actually get that education in which you describe. Terrific job.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, and also I think is a brilliant thing that is community based. I think you touched on it at the start. You haven't got a specific venue, but I think it's always better. It does have its strengths as well, of course.
Yes.
The contrary as well. I just wanted to ask about a sort of CV preparation and interview preparation and savings sort of education as well.
Yes.
For adults. Is that engrossed
yes,
within
definitely. Yeah. We've got some very good relationships with job centres. In fact, we've got very good relationships, particularly with Kettering Job Centre and with Corby Job Centre, and they certainly refer people to us. And we've got actually what we call an information and guidance IAG and progression coordinator who manages that kind of employability skills offer. So yes, we do courses on employability, we call them. So it kind of prepares people for how to fill in application forms, how to fill in CVs, what you should wear when you go to an interview, interview practice, all that kind of thing we can actually offer. And many of those courses are kind of bespoke courses based on our partners saying, look, we've got a group of people who haven't got jobs, haven't worked for a long time. Could you do some work with them? And what we often find with groups like that, we might do some nice engagement stuff first, because to be honest with you, if you say to people, oh, do come to a class where we can tell you how to write a CV, it doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But, if we say, come and do some cookery, or come and do some, come and do some Christmas crafts, or come and do some dance or something like that, that kind of is a kind of hook to encourage people to come. So we certainly do offer that kind of stuff. Yes, that is important. Yeah, and in fact, when you were talking about our community venues, I must admit I forgot to mention that. I think you're absolutely right. Going to people in the community is really important. Going to them in a place that they feel safe, particularly when they're referred by partner organisations that they trust. But we have also recently invested quite a lot of our grant into libraries, which I'm really pleased about, because most libraries have got rooms that we can use to teach from. And of course, they're open and accessible and friendly and warm. And so we've been paying for smart screens in libraries in the north and the west. And indeed at Wellingborough Library, we've bought tables and chairs. So the advantage of using our grant for that, of course, is for teaching and learning for our learners. But the benefit of that, of course, is investing in council buildings. It means when we're not using the rooms, other people can use them as well. So yeah, that community focus is absolutely key. You're right.
Thanks, Carol. Councillor John McGee.
Thank you, Carol. It's clear there's a lot of good stuff going on, but I want to be a little bit challenging. Every time we get the magazine that comes out, I struggle to find anywhere or anything that's happening in our most deprived areas. Just a fact.
Well,
can I finish, please, Carol?
Sorry.
What would be really useful for us to get a real understanding is sort of some key performance indicators like postcodes, how many people from each area, postcodes, what courses they're on, etc. And I'm pleased to see that under the health inequalities that we'll be doing some targeting. And I'm sure with David here, that could tie in nicely with the levelling up agenda that's going on. But I know there's some fantastic work through the years in adult learning, because I've been involved in it for 20 odd years. But I do struggle each time it comes out and there is nothing actually happening in our most deprived areas. And I was told it's because we can't get people. Actually, it's up to us to try and get them in our community.
Yeah, if I could just answer, because obviously this is something that's raised quite often, and it is a real dilemma, because the brochure, of course, does suggest that the only things that are being offered are things that are being advertised in the brochure. And so the list of courses that are programmed and timetabled in the brochure in the main are what we'd call our traditional evening class, a universal program. And so they are planned a long way in advance. And so they So we put them in the brochure so that people can actually enroll on them. On our website, or in the kind of information we provide for partners, there is, of course, always quite a lot more going on than is actually depicted in the brochure that goes through people's doors. And it is a real marketing dilemma, because it doesn't create a very good impression of the adult learning service. You think, blimey, they're doing all that French in Northampton, but why aren't they doing it in Corby? And there is a bit of a challenge, you're quite right, with that universal programme to encourage people to enrol on that universal programme. But in terms of our targeted provision, we're working in lots of schools in Corby. For example, if you're talking about Corby, which is an area we do get complaints about, we're doing lots of neighbourhood learning at Beanfield and other venues in Corby. But of course, it's not in the brochure. And so we have actually worked with the permission of Guy with an external marketing consultant in terms of better communicating what we actually do, because we did decide at one point not to put that brochure out, because it does create a kind of flawed kind of impression of what's actually happening in deprived communities. But when we didn't have a brochure, because of course it is quite old-fashioned to put a brochure for everybody's door as well, but when we didn't have a brochure, from a marketing point of view, we just didn't get people enrolling on the courses, and then lots of courses had to close. The tutors didn't get paid because they were all hourly paid tutors. So between a bit of a rock and a hard place, because I sort of try to explain in the brochure, the list of courses are our universal programme of courses, and I take on board that we perhaps should offer more of that universal programme that people pay for in Corby and Kettering than we do. But a lot of the targeted stuff is happening, but of course that impression isn't in the brochure, and that's a challenge for us, which we do have to address. And I absolutely accept what you're saying.
Chair, can I just ask then, if we do have any future reports on adult learning, we do look at postcodes and in what
absolutely. Oh yeah, I should go on to say we do lots of data analysis, because the kind of questions you're asking are absolutely the questions that Ofsted would ask us as well. They would say, it's public money, how are you spending it, where are you spending it? And you're absolutely right to ask those questions. So we've got lots of data on postcodes, attendance, how we can find out how far people travel for courses as well, because one of the interesting conversations I've been having with the West is that we might put courses on in Northampton, but they won't necessarily all be people who live in Northampton who go to them. Wellingborough is only 8-9 miles down the road, so people, not necessarily people in deprived communities, but people travel across borders to go to the classes that they choose. So we've got lots of analysis on postcode, in terms of where people travel to where their courses are. And yeah, we can, and perhaps I don't know who the chair of the group is, I'm sorry, is it you, Helen? Yeah, so Helen's on our performance board as well. And one of the positive things about having this new performance board, it was previously chaired by Councillor Sandra Naden-Hawley, who you may know, and it was an NCC one, but we've now got a brand new performance board, and the purpose of that, and that's an expectation of Ofsted as well, is to actually kind of provide that challenge, be a critical friend, and provide direction for the service. So Councillor Matt Golby is on it from the West, Councillor Harrison is from the North, and we've also got officers on it as well. And so certainly in terms of the reports that we provide for them, they certainly could be shared with councillors by Helen, or indeed I can come back and talk to you again, or provide regular reports for this group, whatever everybody thinks is best. But is that I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's just making sure that everybody understands what we're trying to do and providing the evidence.
Thanks, Carol. I think the other thing that John mentioned that you've kind of maybe covered a bit, but perhaps not quite, is about KPIs. So
yeah,
obviously you talked about a lot of the data that's looked at, but obviously in terms of are we achieving our aims, and how can we prove we're achieving our aims? And I guess that's going to come a lot within the performance board. But do we already have sort of ways that we are assessing the effectiveness?
Yes, we do. We do have KPIs. Yes, in actual fact, funnily enough, I've just been agreeing those KPIs because we have. Because I don't know if any of you are familiar, but where it's called an inter-authority agreement. So when you've got a lead provider, which is providing services for the North and the West, as we are, then that inter-authority agreement has KPIs which are being agreed at the moment, and they do include things like participation rates, pass rates for exams, the production of a self-assessment report every year, reports for the performance board. We haven't got KPIs at the moment, which is perhaps something we could explore in terms of participation rates for the North and the West, because of course it all kind of happened in April, and we've been quite busy trying to deliver our courses. And I think it's a work in progress to start to really consider the KPIs perhaps for the different authorities in detail. But yes, and we also, of course, have KPIs in terms of what the ESFA expect us to do in terms of participation rates, and another KPI is maintaining our good grading as well, of course. So yes, it's all happening.
Thanks, Carol.
Work in progress.
Councillor Jeff Shacklock.
Chair, thanks very much for that, Carol. I'm very much playing back at catch up at the moment, because I've been out of action for 3 or 4 months with my leg and ankle.
Oh dear.
You mentioned that the delivery is based on need, and I live very much in a rural area, as some do know. Who and how is this need identified, please?
Well, it is, if I'm absolutely honest, most of the need is identified based on the indices of multiple deprivation. So in terms of looking at rural areas, I have to be absolutely honest with you and say we do courses in rural areas, but probably perhaps not as many as our councillors would like. So I would say that we try and offer a cross-county universal provision, which goes to rural areas in the south and in the east, and when we have access to village halls. One of the challenges we're putting on our courses in rural areas is getting a minimum number of people to attend those courses, and also access to venues. And in fact, interestingly enough, I had a phone call from Councillor Maxwell, who you may know, last week to talk about this very subject. And another challenge, of course, is the lack of, as she was raising the concerns about the lack of transport in rural areas for people to actually get to the courses, because we was talking about the fact we've invested quite a lot of funding in Earthlingborough Library, and she was saying, well, people can't get to Earthlingborough Library. So we do try where we can to put courses on in rural areas. Our priority is are the groups that are identified by our funders that are most in need, which are people without level 2 qualifications, people with a mental or physical health need, or people who are from the BAME community, that they've got the kind of priority groups that we work with. But I am conscious that often people who live in rural areas perhaps don't get a fair crack of the whip in terms of adult learning. One of the things we have found has been quite popular, and we have been putting on in some villages, is first aid, doing kind of one-off courses for communities where they felt that, perhaps they've been a bit left out in terms of what we could offer. But the other thing to bear in mind, another challenge for us, is access to tutors, because all of our tutors at the moment are hourly paid. We've got about 100 tutors, and they, because they're on 0 hours contracts, to a certain extent, they can pick and choose what work they want to do for us. And one of the things I'd like to explore in the next year, and to be honest with you, we're waiting until all the new NNC terms and conditions have been agreed, is to explore having some more substantive tutors, because I think that would probably make our life easier. Because to be honest, quite often, if you say to an hourly paid tutor, could you teach cookery here? They'll say, yeah, I'll teach it in Wellingborough. I don't want to drive 10 miles down the road, because if I'm a 0 hours tutor, why would I? So there are lots of kind of external tensions in terms of trying to manage and plan a programme to be, for rural areas, which I'm conscious of.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if that helps, but it is on my mind.
Good.
Where do you live? Sorry, where do you live?
Well, I've just moved into Oundle, but I do come from Barnwell, and you mentioned bus services. Well, we've got a bus stop, but you haven't got a bus service.
Yeah. And that did actually have an impact on us when the bus service worked out in terms of people coming on our courses, I have to admit. Yeah. I think they're coming back, aren't they?
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Just to follow up on Councillor Shacklock's questions, in terms of our priority groups, is social isolation a priority that we have?
Yes, yeah. And I think that's partly because we are linked into public health. And I think that's really positive because in lots of other local authorities, the adult learning provision either sits with children's, where of course it can get lost under all the kind of challenges regarding education and schools, or it can sit in economic regeneration, where there is a massive focus on skills and getting qualifications. Whereas I think because we've got this, it's quite unusual to have so much money for non-accredited provision. I think it's kind of historical, it goes back for years. Northamptonshire has always had over 2 million to deliver non-accredited provision, whereas if you look at somewhere like Lincolnshire, they've got a lot more money to deliver skills, and that's been a decision from, I don't know, who knows when. So I am really pleased that we are in public health, because we can meet those kind of agendas, and we all recognise, and we certainly noticed it during the pandemic, that social isolation can really impact on people's mental health, and it's really desperately sad. So it is a powerful opportunity, I think, to offer community learning to those people.
Yeah, I mean, clearly social isolation happens both in urban and rural
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. But I think sometimes we think about social isolation in rural settings because of that sort of, you talked about the lack of bus services and things like that. So people find it harder to access some of the things. So that might be something in terms of looking at bringing courses and learning into the rural communities, that social isolation might be a priority there.
Yeah, one thing that's been quite interesting, of course, is the pandemic pushed us to go online. We are quite, we've always done everything in the classroom. And I think one of the kind of sort of positive messages, it's brought learning into the home. And yes, of course, I was mentioning the fact that if people haven't got the digital skills or the Wi-Fi, that's a challenge. But we have had lots of feedback from people saying, blimey, I'm disabled, or, I'm not on a bus route, but, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this class because it was online. And that's definitely something we're going to continue, because that's another way of reaching those communities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Councillor Russell Roberts.
Thanks. Yeah, fascinating conversation, and a lot of what I was going to talk about has been covered, which is always the sign of a good conversation going on. I get concerned about people who haven't got the sort of home life that leads them to be able to concentrate and focus on the challenges of getting an education, as it were. And I was I was going to ask you about libraries, but you've already covered that. We've got community hubs that are going to be created. I think it's incredibly important to help somebody who, and not expect them to go and learn a skill to get a job when they can't boil an egg.
Absolutely.
That was me when I first went to college, and I wondered if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that's quite interesting, and what we're able to do with our grant, is put lots of investment into learning support. So we have got a learner support advisor, and we're about to recruit another learner support assistant who offers kind of, in terms of supporting individuals, they can phone up and talk to our learner support advisor, indeed any of our curriculum coordinators, if they need some one-to-one support. So from that point of view, we really try and help people who are underconfident. We also do a lot of training for our tutors, a lot of CPD, to ensure that they understand it's not like teaching in a college. You are often teaching people who are underconfident, and many of them, of course, had very bad experiences at school and are very loath to return to education. And of course, lots of people, particularly on our basic skills courses, have got unidentified needs which have kind of affected their ability to learn. For example, many people who are not very good at English at school had dyslexia. Nobody actually kind of realised if they were in their 40s and 50s now. So we have got experts on our team who can provide one-to-one support and guidance. We also have a policy of having quite small groups. We very rarely have a group of learners above 10, possibly for some courses above 10, but certainly on our courses which focus on basic skills, or people that you describe who perhaps haven't really got much of a skill set on cookery or English or whatever it is. We think that a small class size really benefits people in terms of individual attention. And we've also got a very dedicated team of teaching assistants. And interestingly enough, in our last Ofsted, the report actually praised the teaching assistants, and then they'd noted that often the learners felt more confident talking to the teaching assistants than they did the tutor, because perhaps they were nervous because they thought they were a teacher, but also the teaching assistant could do one-to-one stuff with them. So I think we sort of try different kind of strategies to help people as much as we can, and that's part of our kind of USP, I suppose, that we are kind of nurturing and caring and supportive, and you come to us on community learning courses and it's all about you as an individual. Each learner has an individual learning plan where they negotiate their personal targets, where they're supported to reach those targets, and just generally, I suppose, try and be as helpful as we can for people who, as you've described, haven't necessarily.
If I may, Carol, in a former life as a teacher, I know that one of the most important jobs we were doing on occasions was to teach the parents as well as the children.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's what we try to do in our family learning program. And I think that is really, really valuable, because for quite a lot of those parents that are identified and recruited and encouraged to attend by either the family worker or somebody else in the school, the only times they go to school normally is when they've had a bad experience or their child is in trouble. And in our experience, these parents want to help their children, or carers, they want to do their best for their children, but they had a bad experience at school themselves, or they don't know the best way to do it. So we do courses called Keeping Up with the Children, where we do very basic maths, where we can show them how maths is taught these days. It's so different to when they were at school. We also do a parenting course called 1, 2, 3 Magic, which is evidence-based for those parents who perhaps would like some support on how to manage their children's behaviour. We do lots and lots of focus on what we call family resilience. So it might be a 6-week course where one of the weeks might be talking about healthy eating, another week might be talking about regular bedtimes and reading to your child, or playing games with your child. Lots and lots of focus on those kinds of courses, on speaking and listening and listening skills. So I do think our family learning program is a really powerful part of what we actually offer. And indeed, nationally, there has been research that the kind of children's skills improve because of the fact that they see their parents taking education seriously, so they take education seriously themselves, increases their confidence. And one of the things that's really positive is when we have groups of parents who get so infused in their school, they actually get an English and maths qualification. So the children think, oh, mum's got a certificate as well, and I've got a certificate. And before the pandemic, sometimes in some schools, we used to have assemblies where, on Fridays, the children go up and they get their kind of certificate for getting the award of the week. Sometimes the parents would come in and go up on the stage and get their certificates, and there'd be a round of applause and everyone would be happy. And of course, that's such a positive kind of message to give to children, isn't it? A, you keep learning. B, it's never too late. C, getting a certificate's a really valuable, important thing in your life. So
I won't hog the thing, but some of our parents that we'd helped out came back with knowledge that we couldn't have imagined they'd got.
Yeah. And all the research shows children do better at school if their parents are committed to their education. So it's a powerful thing.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you. David.
Thanks, Carol. Really helpful. I think one of the bits that was referenced was the work the scrutiny review that's being done around our levelling up communities, is the terminology we prefer to use rather than left behind communities.
Yeah.
We have 2 meetings in January, one of which is going to be themed around education, exclusion, skills and employment. So I've suggested that we get you invited to that.
Yes, please, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
Discussion at that meeting around some of the points that have been raised on the call today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Yeah.
And then I know you've been working on the KPIs for the inter-authority agreements, but it would probably be helpful after we've done some of this work around left behind communities to review our corporate scorecard and see whether there's any way that those could be certainly bolstered within your service scorecard.
Yeah, definitely. We've got some KPIs which we're talking to public health about as well. So I'm not sure if they're the same ones, but they're, but I can double check with Lucy.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we're the thread of everything we're doing is connecting everything up. So, you know, absolutely. I think
interesting. Yeah, I was at a conference last week, interestingly enough, and there was a lot of to do with adult education, and there was a lot of talk about how we can support the levelling up agenda. So yeah, it's quite interesting you've mentioned it today.
Yeah, and I think it goes all the way back to Councillor McGee's point about, you know, being able to see that we are, you know, having an effect in these areas, that it isn't just the brochure courses that are going on, that, you know, councillors will be able to see that, yes, in Corby, this has been delivered, and these are the outcomes, and, you know, so we can know that real development and real progress is being made in our left behind communities. You know, it's not just a government push, it's very much central to, you know, very core to what we're doing in this council.
Absolutely.
And you know, just being able to connect all those dots up between all the different parts of our work is so vital. So you know, I think that's going to be really important going forward. Another thing that we'll be looking at on the performance board, I'm absolutely certain, and that I'll be pushing for, because we all really want to see improvement and change, you know, genuine long-term change in our left behind communities, so that hopefully one day they're no longer left behind communities. That's the ultimate aim there.
And also, I think in terms of what you're saying, linking adult learning into what everybody else is doing, as David mentioned, because I think for too long, certainly in the county council, not a criticism of the county council, I think a lot, and which is why I was quite pleased, well, very pleased that Lucy suggested I came today, is I think adult learning, because it's not been funded by the base budget, it's just kind of there, it just does its thing, you know, it just kind of soldiers on, and often people don't quite recognise what it can do, but also link it into all the other council agendas. So I do see, in many ways, the kind of the unitary local government reform as a way of making a fresh start for this service as well, which is really positive.
Yeah. And I'll go to you in just a sec, King. I was just going to pick up on something that Councillor McGee and I were talking about at the beginning of the meeting, which was the sort of cooking and healthy eating programme. And you're probably aware, Carol, you might or might not be, but there's a paper coming to our executive next month looking at a growing cooking and healthy eating programme. And I know that the adult learning are going to be involved in that. So, you know, it's just, you know, it's good to see the connections taking place. Definitely. And that's absolutely going to be targeted at our most left behind communities. And so, you know, it's nice to see all these things coming together. So I'll just go over to King.
Hi again, Carol. Thanks, Chair. Just and sort of a point of interest. When we're sort of talking about linking in, and of course during the tuition and the education that you offer, you spend a lot of time. You choose to spend a lot of time with the adults and children.
Yeah.
Do you do anything around sort of signposting them once sort of extracurricular skills are identified, like of creative talent, sporting talent, musical talent? Do you sort of work with, or in partnership with, community groups or the Arts Council and people like that? Sort of move them on after?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a very strong message from Ofsted, and is that education is all about progression and moving people on, and we are inspected on that as part of Ofsted. But we also have to hold something which is called the Matrix Standard, which we got in March. It gets renewed. It's a quality standard, and we're inspected on that as well. And that's all about careers advice and guidance, and it's all part of that kind of discussion that you should you're not providing clubs for people, you're providing people with education opportunities that will move them on. So we have a very big focus obviously on moving people onto employment or into other education opportunities, and indeed and we actually do surveys on that and questionnaires on that, and we report on that. In terms of kind of working with the Arts Council or other community organisations in terms of the arts, I think we kind of each tutor at the end of each course provides information for those learners on what they can do next. And certainly in terms of the arts courses, people quite often go on to do things with the Open University or with the college or with a kind of sort of private trainer. But I suppose, if I'm honest, most of our kind of focus on careers guidance has been to do with perhaps moving people on to getting more qualifications or moving on to college or getting a job rather than the creative industries. I didn't mention, perhaps, you know, I could go on, couldn't I? We also have to link what we do to, I don't know if you're familiar with SEMLEP, which is the South East Midlands LEP. And I'm pleased to say, and you're meeting this afternoon, Helen, Paul Thompson, the Employment and Skills Manager, sits on our performance board as well. And part of our contract also says that we have to link into the kind of priorities of our local LEP. And the priorities of the local LEP in this area are very much to do with kind of technical skills, hospitality, the creative industries. But the kind of direction we get from the LEP is that we work with those learners before they're ready perhaps to go on to get those technical qualifications or other qualifications. So they are very supportive of us working with the most hard to reach or the people who have. And their big thing, of course, are digital skills and, you know, getting people's and improving their digital qualifications. So that's, you know, we've got all these different drivers. We've got you, we've got the council, we've got Ofsted, we've got
Absolutely.
And we've got our funders, and we've got the LEP.
Because a case would be sort of, if you notice somebody who was deprived to actually, let's say, and just on that sort of academia point, sort of explore their maths capability, but then actually really, really good at maths, they would want to be sort of, the tutor sort of identify that person for further education, and similar with sort of other skills as well.
It's really important that we do that.
Chance to actually identify their skill at it, and that's
Otherwise, the big word for Ofsted, and I think it's probably a word for your panel as well, is so what? You do that, so what? You know, what happens? You know, what are you going to do about it? So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're all over that. Very exhausting. A lot of work.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Carol, and thanks for your clear passion and enthusiasm for everything that you do. That really comes shining through.
Thank you.
And
we try.
And it's really helpful for us to get that overview. And I think it's possible that what we might want to do is invite you back again to another EAP further down the line, and we can perhaps look at some of those, look at perhaps particularly the left behind community, and perhaps focus on that. So. But with that, I just want to say thank you again. Let you go because I know you've got lots of stuff going on.
I was just going to say, Helen, perhaps if I come again, perhaps you and I could have a conversation on what kind of things people are really interested in. I can prepare in advance, because today I was very conscious. I was just sort of rattling through a very simple presentation, and it's quite complex.
I think, however, it was really useful because now we know what services are encompassed by that, and it gives us a good base for then thinking about what we want to know in the future. So, obviously the left behind communities is one that I know we're all very passionate about.
Absolutely.
But it may, again, it might be that when the programme of growing, cooking and healthy eating comes forward, it might be that you help, you report back on your aspect of that. So there's lots of things that we might want to know. But yes, I'll talk to you about that.
Definitely.
And, be guided by the panel as to what they want. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. I'll see you later.
Yes, indeed. See you later.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good Christmas.
Yeah, you too.
Francesca, too, for moving the slides.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for the excellent questions to Carol. This panel always is very enthusiastic and, comes up with all sorts of really good and interesting probing questions. So, again, I thank you for that. So we're now obviously going to hand over to David to take us through the draft budget proposals in his directorate. So over to you, David.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I clearly don't want to teach you all to suck eggs, but the papers for executive were published yesterday. But what I would like to do, if you would bear with me, is just run through some of the key points before then moving into a little bit more detail about what's happening in adults, communities and wellbeing. What I've done within my own version of the pack is just really tried to highlight some areas which I think will be of importance to you. On the main covering document, just pulling out some of the main headline assumptions within the draft budgets. We've done a huge amount of work over the last 6 to 8 months of being a new authority to try and make sure that we can set a balanced budget for 22-23. We started the year with an 18.5 million gap for next year's budget, which through various accounting techniques and finding efficiencies, additional monies coming in, we believe that we are now in a position to propose and set a balanced budget for 22-23. That has required both additional investment, it's involved some reduction of ongoing funding around COVID-19, and it has also required us to find efficiencies and income generation opportunities throughout that period of time. Planned savings and pressures from previous medium-term financial plans will remain to be delivered. So as an example, within adult social care, there is circa £7 million worth of savings that have been built in previous medium-term financial plans. And you will recall that this was referenced as being the new target operating model, or the Newton work, which has sort of helped us to develop what those proposals would be and moving forward. The budget also recognises additional investment in social care, so recognising the increase in national living wage to £9.50 per hour and the 1.25% increase in national insurance contributions for care providers. Clearly, there's knock-on impacts of that as well. So if you up the hourly rate, then your pension contributions, etc., go up as well. So that's factored into it as well. And additionally, earlier this year, we made the announcement that we would address our lowest paid staff within the council by introducing the real living wage for 2021 to our lowest paid staff, and for those staff that came across from the old county council, where we had a number of staff on different grades being paid exactly the same rate, we have reintroduced incremental pay progression there, so that people who are supervisors are not being paid the same amount of pay as the people that are supervising. The budget also accounts for an increase in council tax, which consists of the 1.99% for the core council tax increase, and also proposes that we also take the 1% for the adult social care precept that we are able to take. That's the maximum that the council can propose to uplift council tax without undertaking a referendum. And this proposal is obviously suggesting to executive that that's what we would advise to do as officers. And that would result in an average weekly increase in council tax of 88 pence a week for a Band D equivalent property. However, the work doesn't stop there. We are still looking to continue to identify efficiencies to help us address budget requirements for 23-24 as well. So whilst we believe we can set a balanced budget for 22-23, there is still work to do for subsequent years after that. I will go into Appendix B in a minute, so I'm not going to repeat that there, but just for those of you that are not aware, Over the last month and a half or so, we've been having budget challenge sessions where each executive director and their direct reports have presented to our executive members the proposals that we have in our particular areas. We've been opened up to scrutiny from them around that and challenge, and had to evidence why we think we can set budgets in the way that we are, and our confidence levels around delivering savings or efficiencies as a result of that. Just to give you some headline figures from some of the announcements that have been coming out recently, not the ones yesterday, but the ones that sort of happened in November. So funding for social care reform, how that looks for us as a local authority, we believe that will mean we'll get an additional 200,000 in 22-23, 1.4 million in 23-24, and 2 million in 24-25. Whilst any additional money is welcomed by local government, we don't believe that will create extra for us. What we believe will come with that money will be additional activity or demand that we have to do. And if I was to distill that into what it means in additional staff or additional activities that we will have to carry out, my initial assessment of those additional monies are that we will be expected to undertake more social work assessments of people. And that's because there's an expectation that with the funding, the contribution caps that self-funders will mean that more people will ask us to contribute towards the cost of their care, of which this money is there to assist with. But in order to do that, you have to administer the function as well. So we would need to undertake more social work assessments. We may also need to employ more administrators to administer what we would describe as care accounts, in order to understand that, yes, people are spending that money on their care and support needs. And additionally, on top of that, there will be the additional care costs where we do determine that someone is eligible and that they have met those care caps. There will be additional care cost to the local authority. So we have effectively said, well, yes, we expect new income, but we expect to spend all of that. We don't expect it to offset current pressures and challenges that we have within there. At the time where the report was drafted, details of the provisional local government finance settlement hadn't come out. That was published yesterday, so we're just in the process of obviously reviewing whether that makes any difference. And throughout the consultation period, we will listen to what you in the EAP, but also our public and other stakeholders say around our proposals. And the final budgets that we bring forward in February will take account of the settlement as well, which is obviously open to consultation. I've already covered 2.18 there, and there's a bit more detail if you did want to have a look at it in the covering report in 2.19 and 220 around the impact of the proposed council tax increases. I've already told you about those bits. So just to give you an idea of next steps. So the consultation on the draft budget ends, I haven't got the date there, but I've got it later somewhere, towards the end of January, and an updated full suite of budget reports will be presented to the executive on the 10th of February. You can see the list of reports that will be taken there. That we will also be discussing with our tenants organisations around their housing revenue account, which I will give you some detail of as well. So again, these are the key dates. So we published the draft budget. I think it was yesterday, actually, not the 15th, and the local government finance settlement was published yesterday, so we will be working through that. The draft budget report, so this report is going to our executive on the 23rd of December, and the budget consultation ends officially on the 28th of January, which then gives us the best part of 2 weeks to turn around the updated papers to go forward to executive for then recommendation to move to council as well. So that gives you an idea of the timescale that we're working to. I think it's important to note that we have to be really careful, not just to, it's not just about how we manage within resources, but it's about how we develop really positive working relationships with other organisations, communities, partner agencies to deliver better and more efficiently as well, but also trying to encourage self-determination and independence. Let me just scroll down to some of the income and expenditure detail relevant to my area. The core spending power increases to the local authority will take into account the national announcements of the 3.6 billion that has previously been announced for adult social care reforms. So we know that that's sort of backloaded. The front-loading elements of that will go in supporting NHS recovery, and there will be a tapered increase over the next 3 years of the funding coming through to local government. Funding for social care reform assumptions that we have made include, as I say, 200,000 for 22-23, increasing up to 2 million in 24-25. And you can just see that in the context of some other funding increases that we're expecting to see. Current budget makes no assumptions regarding funding for family help, and whilst the budget does allow for additional funding, estimated to be just over 800,000. As previously mentioned, we think that will be matched by an increase in spend of a similar level. I have highlighted 4.18 and 4.19 just because of the council tax increases. Again, vulnerable people tend to feel the impact of that more than some of our more affluent areas. So just important for you as a panel to consider that. And the COVID Recovery Fund has been extended by a 1.8 billion. Of this, £1 billion has been provided to schools over the next 2 academic years. That equates to £145 per pupil in primary schools and slightly more in secondary schools. And the holidays, activities and food programme has been extended with an additional 200 million per year to continue that programme. We expect the public health grant to be maintained in real terms. And there's also some interesting announcements around further investment in affordable housing. And spending on rough sleeping due to increase in 24-25 nationally as well. Some other spending review announcements that may impact on our council budget, and again, I think they're all relevant to this EAP. So the national minimum wage to increase to £9.50 per hour, positive but has a financial impact for us. Public sector pay freeze will end, so again there will be pressure on us, particularly through our unions, to be exploring what we can do around public sector pay for our workers. We've already committed significant funds, however, still find ourselves having difficulty competing with other sectors for recruitment and retention of staff as well. Continuation of the temporary increase in surplus earnings threshold for universal credit claimants until April 23. So that enables people to earn more money while still claiming universal credit. So will be beneficial for some of our lower paid staff as well. And you can see as well, workers leaving the furlough scheme and making a UC claim will be prioritised through the job finding support scheme, so supporting people to find employment if they lost it during the furlough period as well. Section 4.29, I think is really, section 4.29 through to section 4.35 specifically focuses on funding for adult social care reform in more detail. I won't go through it in any massive detail. I have given you the headlines earlier on, but it would be worth you having a look there. However, we are still awaiting some further announcements and trying to understand the implementation requirements for social care improvements and its allocation. Again, I'm not going to dwell on it, but we are still in that context of sort of COVID recovery at the moment, and we have to be cautious as a local authority and continue to explore what we understand about the impacts of all of those proposals above and impacts above, in order to try and make sure that we deliver on the balanced budget that we're setting for 22-23, but also identify how we will contribute and transform our services during 22-23 to contribute to 23-24 budget gap. Just to give you some headline figures of the social care grants and Improve Better Care funds, monies that we expect to see coming in. The announcements yesterday will provide clarity of that for us, but within our medium-term financial plan, we've assumed just under 7.7 million for the social care grant and just over 11 million for the Improve Better Care Fund. Both of them have conditions around how they are spent, and they are ring-fenced to social care spend as well. I think from this document, that is probably all that I need to go through, but what I would want to do is just take you through, where are we? Some of the appendix documents. I'm struggling to work out how I can get past this. At the top of my screen, there's all the sharing toolbar, and if you're on full screen, it makes it difficult for you to navigate through the documents. So I just wanted to run you through some of the additional pressures that have been identified as part of the budget challenge process, and also any investments or interventions that we're doing in order to address those. So the first area that I will focus on is our commissioning area. We have 5 pressures that are highlighted there. This first one, the contract changes, we build into our medium-term financial plans assumptions around how much our contractual arrangements with the independent care sector, how much our contracts with the independent care sector will increase. Most of that is driven by the national living wage increases that we see year on year at the moment. We also build in demographic and prevalence pressures, so recognising that we have a population that's living for longer, we build additional pressures in order to recognise that. And we have seen some increased pressures, particularly within mental health spend, so you can see that we have factored in assumptions around that as well. Again, the impact of social care reform, we've built that in, but we need to revisit that in light of the announcements yesterday. And the bottom one, where you see there is a reversal of COVID-related pressures. So the brackets mean that we are assuming that we won't see the same level of pressure as we did over the last year, carrying forward into our future budget. So we expect it to reduce down within 22-23 and then reduce down further, so that the cohort of people that have been specifically funded through COVID CC clinical commissioning discharge group discharges will effectively no longer show in our budgets by 24-25. Savings that we already have built in to the MTFP includes an anticipated saving of 647,000 in this year through our admission avoidance approach. And the big saving that we have been looking at delivering, which predominantly relates to the target operating model work and embedding strengths-based practices, anticipates that we will see a reduction in requirement for care support of circa 2.1 million this year and just under 600,000 next year. How that's achieved is by supporting people to regain independence, connecting them to the communities, and potentially some investment in the voluntary sector to manage that as well. The next area where you will have some interest will be in housing in communities, predominantly the housing elements, but the temporary accommodation is the main pressure that we've identified in that space, with an additional expected pressure of £80,000 this year. The rest of those relate particularly to sort of things like the reopening of our leisure services and recognising that they're not up to full capacity because of the COVID restrictions that have been experienced over the last year, people perhaps choosing to end their membership and having not restarted them. And then there's a couple of technical accounting changes within public health, including reversal of the one-off fully funded expenditure related to COMP, which is the Contained Outbreak Management Fund for test and trace activity. So that has costed us over £6 million in this year, and we expect to see a reversal of that moving forward into the next year as test and trace steps back and we have to start living with COVID as being a part of the normal day-to-day lives within where we are. Clearly, if there is an extension to the COMP funding and requirements that we continue that activity, then we would expect to see corresponding grant coming from government in order to be able to fund that. But at this moment in time, the Contained Outbreak Management Fund is due to come to an end at the end of March, and we can't afford to continue to keep that activity running if the money doesn't come in that sense. Just the next area that I'd just like to give you a bit of sight on is the General Fund Capital Programme that relates to adults, communities and wellbeing. And some of these you will be familiar with, some of them less so. Probably the one which most people understand is the Disabled Facilities Grants, which is a central grant that comes into us, but we have to input entirely into the Better Care Fund. It still gets spent on disabled facilities grants, but we monitor it through the Better Care Fund, and it's seen as being the local authorities' part of the local authorities' contribution. We've made assumptions that we will spend circa 1.9 million on an annual basis for the next 3 years. In relation to that, what this relates to is adaptations in people's properties. It might be stair lifts, it might be ceiling track hoists, it might be wet rooms, etc. Those sorts of adaptations being made in people's properties. We have some small grants which we also do, so that tends to be things like grab rails, handles outside people's front doors, sometimes a small ramp, that side of things, which are picked up through the small and other capital works grants. And you can see that we expect to be spending circa 2 million, 1 million and 1 million over the next 3 years in relation to continuing to develop our housing and homelessness prevention activities. So that does include acquiring stock in order to make it available for homelessness. Some others which fall into my areas but perhaps are of less interest to you and probably more of interest to the and tourism projects and grants to things like village halls, so where we're doing repairs, etc., to some of those village halls. I've spoken for ages. And hopefully you've all had an opportunity to sort of, oh, I haven't done HRA. Do you want me to do HRA? So yeah, just
go for it.
So just some of our expected capital spend on the housing revenue accounts that you will find that in Appendix B of the capital documentations. And this gives you an idea of the amount of money which we are spending on our HRA properties, so the circa 8,000 properties that we own and manage in Kettering and Corby, and what we are, the sorts of things that we are spending them on, which ranges from refreshment of smoke detectors, heating repairs, new boiler installations, external door repairs, so a whole range of things, new bathrooms, new kitchens. So it just gives you an idea. And the total that we expect to see over that period of time for Corby equates over the next 3 years to 25 million of capital investment. And then for Kettering, it equates to 38 million over that same period of time.
I think that's 12 million, David. And then the total for Northampton is 38
Sorry,
million.
it is, yeah, right. Sorry. Thank you for correcting me. I was bound to make one mistake with all these tables and numbers. So, but that just gives you an idea of the sorts of investments that we are putting into those properties, or what we expect to. The challenge has always been making sure that we can get the supplies in, making sure we've got the tradespeople to undertake those activities as well, and we do have a fairly significant backlog of some of the bigger capital works as a result of not being able to send contractors into the early part of the pandemic, but that is our plan over the next 3 years. But happy to open up for discussion, comments. As I said in my email to you this morning, this isn't the end of the conversation. This is this is what we've published yesterday. What are your initial thoughts on that? What I am very conscious of is that it would have, I don't think it worked with the timescale for our EAP for us to wait until the next EAP in order to do this. So it was felt useful for us to have at least an initial discussion at this EAP. I will take the slides down just so I can see you all. But if you do want me to put them back up to refer to anything, please do let me know.
Thanks, David. That was actually a really useful way of going through it with you highlighting the bits of a very lengthy document that are particularly relevant to this EAP. And rightly, you're pointing out that this draft budget came out yesterday. So most of us will have, had a chance to glance at it rather than go into it, I think, in any great depth and detail. So actually, the way you went through it was helpful. Not only to highlight some of the bits that matter to us, but also it'll probably help us when we start looking through it in detail ourselves to home in on the bits that are particularly relevant to this panel. So, with all of those caveats about, the length of time we've had to look at this, and, it's, and David rightly saying this is kind of initial thoughts. Let's hear what your initial thoughts are, and please, really do bear in mind that this is very, very much the start of the process, and there's a lot of scrutiny going to go on, and opportunities for comments. And I think probably, David, it might be useful if, after people have had time to digest this over the next few days, that they're perhaps able to feed in, perhaps to you via email or phone calls, whatever, to other questions or thoughts that will feed into the process, because I do feel quite acutely that this is difficult when we're looking at something that's so very new to us. So with all of those caveats and so on, if we could go to Councillor King-Lewell first, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, David, for that. As the chair has mentioned, I've not had a chance to digest it at all. None of us have. Over the next few days, I'll make that a job of mine to do, and I'm sure this will come to finance resources scrutiny as well, which I'll get further opportunity there as well to scrutinise it. But just wanted to ask a couple of questions, David. The first being, can we get the highlighted version, if that's possible? That would be fantastic, just because you've done all that work and it saves us a job.
I hope so. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to save it, and at the moment it just sits there in my Adobe and I don't close it, but I'll try and save it and get it around to you.
No problem. Thanks, David. And a couple other questions. And again, I'm not sure why I haven't asked this before, Chair, but how comes Wellingborough doesn't have a housing revenue account, HRA? Where's Wellingborough? I keep looking out for Wellingborough. It
was outsourced to, so Greatwell Homes effectively is the old Wellingborough housing stock. In the same way, East Northampton outsourced as well. But Corby and Kettering made decisions to keep their HRAs in. Moving forward, so we have a 2-year dispensation to run 2 neighbourhood accounts, or effectively 2 HRAs, but we need to bring the 2 together. Sounds dead easy, but it's a lot more complicated than what you think, particularly because there were different approaches to investment decisions that were made by the 2 authorities previously. That's not to say either of those decisions were wrong. It's just with different approaches, we need to think carefully about how we bring those together. But it's a perfectly legitimate question, but it is because Greatwell Homes took on the Wellingborough housing stock.
Yeah, superb. And finally, Chair, if I may, and this is of the sort of quite recently happened, so I'm not sure if this will be factored within the budget, but you've seen from the Bank of England increasing their interest rates from 0.1 to 0.25. So mortgage people on mortgage will actually have to pay more money. Is that factored within this budget when we're looking at social care payments and stuff like that?
So you mean for it won't be, because it was only announced yesterday.
Yeah, of course.
If what you're talking about is, for example, residential care homes may have their properties mortgaged, and therefore they may see a knock-on impact, I would suggest that has not been included in the main. But what you may have seen yesterday is there was also announcements around local authorities undertaking pieces of work around the fair cost of care, and I anticipate that work that we need to do certainly over the next year to get us ahead of that will explore some of those issues with care providers, because the fair cost of care work will look at the moment, if you're a self-funder, so if you pay the full cost of your care, you are probably supplementing a little bit of local authority spend as a result of doing that. So care providers may say, well, if you are a self-funder and you have a bed in a residential nursing care home, you will pay at a higher rate than a local authority does. But the government's commitments around the funding caps and the fair cost of care has been that self-funders shouldn't have to pay a different rate. So we have to understand, well, if that subsidy isn't there, how will we work with care providers to make sure that is met, and that additional burden on local government is factored into our budgets moving forward.
Thank you, David. You answered my subsequent question. Thank you.
Thanks, King. Russell.
Thanks, David. That was really useful. And King's asked the question I was going to ask about the highlighted copy, and also on the cost of borrowing. That worries me. That concerns me a lot. Does the budget it must take into account inflation, which is a big sum at the moment and could go up.
It does.
I would have anticipated that. I mean, you said it earlier. It's ensuring that you're managing the budget, but whilst investing and making sure that you maximise on the investment that you're putting in there. And there's so many things, like we talked about this the other day. It's going to have an effect on this budget, and that's the carbon neutral nature of boilers going forward, because they are going to cost a huge amount extra. And I wondered, there's a lot of things I want to ask you, but I'm going to go away and read it first. I wondered if you'd highlighted that anywhere or made a footnote somewhere in the budget to anticipate this, because the budget rolls forward a few years, so we ought to get it in there somewhere.
Whilst I haven't got an answer to that, but I will look at the climate impact section whilst we're on the call and see if I can see anything specifically in there.
We're pretty committed to this, aren't we, really? And
yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing, particularly for our HRAs, I think the main thing that we need to be cognizant of is we can't hold back on doing some of the new boiler installations because people need them. So we have to use today's technology in order to do that. And that means that those boilers will, be in service for another 10 to 15 years after that before they're replaced again. But the boilers that we are fitting will be the most efficient for today's market that we possibly can. Many of them have the potential to be converted into being able to use hydrogen. So a lot of the manufacturers are now manufacturing them so that they can be used, and they can use both natural gas and hydrogen in order to power them moving forward. So those are all the sorts of things that we are thinking about around the HRA moving forward. To be fair, it's been more around things like supply chain issues have been pushing the price increases up than perhaps new technology at the moment. So that's been one of the challenges that we've had, particularly over the pandemic period.
Well, if I may, Chair, it's a small amount at the moment. The cost of borrowing has gone up, but that's now the trend, and that will set in for the next number of years. And obviously putting up council tax and proposing to put council tax up is a serious matter, and people rely on us making sure we spend the money wisely, but we have got to do this levelling up as well that we always allude to, and make sure that we don't leave these areas that need extra funding focused on them. We leave them behind even more. So again, there's a lot of this is a proposal for a balanced budget under pressure.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. That is absolutely correct. This is budget setting for local government is never easy, and it takes a massive amount of hard work and officer time and consultation and work. it's never ever easy, and we're never awash with money, sadly. So lots of difficult decisions have to be made, unfortunately. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. You're absolutely right. We're in extraordinary times trying to set budgets, and I do have concerns where we are putting large amounts of money from savings, not just from ourselves, but from health and CCGs, etc., on something that may or may not happen. We don't know how long this is going to happen, what's going to happen with this new Omicron, whatever it is. So there's a lot of assumptions in the budget, not only about COVID, etc., but there's also assumptions about any of the grants coming from government. And it's always a worry, isn't it? But we have to make some assumptions. I just worry about how stable it's going to be till we get the full information. I've not had a real chance, as you said, Chair, to go through all of it, but I do welcome the money carrying on for the HALF programme. I think that's got to be welcome for the food programmes and the HALF programmes. A couple of smaller things, if I may. Can you explain to me about the money that's been removed from the Castle Theatre in Wellingborough, given that part of our agenda is about that sort of thing? I think it's 98k or something that's been moved from that.
I can't answer that on the call, but I can double check with Kerry and come back to you, Councillor McGee.
And can I just ask one more thing about are we jumping the gun about making so many savings about the reversal of COVID on our leisure services, given this new strand going forward? Because we don't know what's going to happen moving into next year. And on leisure services, Chair, may I also ask that they're very expensive, leisure services, and they need looked after. Do we have, or are we putting a sink fund in to ensure they're kept up to a good standard going forward? Because if we don't have that sink fund in to keep our leisure services up to a good standard, and then we start losing people going to them. One other question, if I may, Chair, because I haven't seen it all. The HRA, I know just now that assessing people that need houses, etc., they're still assessing people from August, and they're playing catch up. Have we put anything in so that we can help that catch up? And one other thing is the biggest problem for me as a councillor, especially in my area, reports on housing estampness. Have we put any funding in to try and bring some of our older stock that have damp problems to try and fix that? You'll be glad to know that's all I've got just now, Chair.
Thanks, John. So it's quite a list of questions there. And I think obviously I'll hand over to David to answer any he can. Some of them we might need to go to Kerry, I think, for answers. But David, do you have any comments on those questions?
Yeah, so I mean, what I would say, particularly around, I mean, I've said I'll find out the detail around Castle Theatre for you, because I'm not 100% sure on what narrative we would give you for that. What I would say around the COVID funding is probably just to repeat what I said earlier, which is if the Omicron variant or other variants of interest come forward and they are having a demonstrable impact, then I would expect that there will be a government response in order for us to have the funds coming into it. What we can't do is continue with funding on the assumption that it will come in. We have to work on the assumption that it's not going to until such a point where we hear differently. I think probably what I would say around leisure services, Councillor McGee, and is probably one of those things you wouldn't want to hear, but I've been absolutely focusing on the HRAs at the moment because we know that we've got quite a bit of challenge in those, and it's probably one of those areas. Leisure services is probably one of those areas where it's ticking by. But I absolutely understand what you say. If we are committed to having those, then we need to be understanding what the investment plan is moving forward. I know certainly so I had a tour with Councillor Howe of our Corby Leisure Services. It was late summer, I think, and there was already investment plans, particularly around some of the equipment which is coming to the end of its cycle in place. So I know certainly on equipment there is a refresh cycle and budget built in for that. But if you're talking about investment in buildings, that side of things, other than routine maintenance, I haven't seen anything regarding a sinking fund, but I will speak to both Councillor Howe and Kerry to see if we can get you any more explanation around that.
Thanks, David. Is that okay?
I haven't finished. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Got damp, and I just wanted to ask a question around Councillor McGee. You said around the allocation of houses. Were you talking actually about the allocation of houses, or were you talking about people getting their assessments for homelessness and whether they get onto the housing register in the first place?
It's not so much even about homelessness, David. I know people are overcrowded and homelessness. We're still doing assessments from August rather than now.
Okay, it's more about assessments of their housing need rather than whether we're not allocating our houses that we are responsible for in either Corby or Kettering.
It must just be a staff shortage or something, maybe COVID sickness or etc. But it is a worrying because I do have some cases where people are still waiting to hear things from a long time ago. And the other one, Chair, I would like to labour on the dampness problem, because I do get a lot of that, unfortunately, in my area. And I know that at Corby Borough Council, was it the year before we finished, I did put forward a proposal for 400k to look into the dampness of the houses. And I don't know where that went, but there is a problem, and I'm sure it's not just Corby. I'm sure parts of Kettering and the older estates and Wellingborough, etc., even Rushden, etc., do have their problems. And sometimes we need to specifically target that.
Yeah, I mean, just in response to that, Councillor McGee, I absolutely agree with you, and I equally get to see the correspondence that you and other councillors are passing on with regards to some of the challenges that we have in the property. What I have committed to doing is putting in place an officers' housing improvement board, which will look at a number of different things, including our approach to allocation of accommodation. It will look at some of the key issues which have picked up, particularly around responsiveness to repairs, of which, coming in and inserting new damp-proof courses or improving ventilation or improving heating will all contribute to. So whilst it may not be specifically set out in the capital improvement plan, that work will be captured under probably general maintenance or some of the other bits. So when you fit new double glazing, they will often have vents on them, particularly for our older properties, to enable there to be a flow of air, which manages some of that. But absolutely, I've received your points, Councillor McGee, and I will feed them into the housing improvement board that we are going to be putting in place.
Thank you.
King has got to leave, I think, haven't you, King? Because you've got another meeting.
I have indeed. Take care, everybody. Merry
Have
Christmas.
a wonderful Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Councillor Roberts.
I was going to say that I thought that there was, with the damp and such like that, there is an ongoing work being done on these things, and I anticipate that's not been stopped. And I had heard the other day, I think there is the administration has won some new money to spend on the arts and libraries and such like recently. But I think it's prudent to focus. Sometimes you just have to be tough and focus on an important aspect. And I think, David, you're doing the right thing in what you're doing there with that focus.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Okay, thanks. So clearly there's lots and lots to get into with this budget. So please do, have a good good scrutiny of it, and get in touch with any further points that you want to bring forward, and obviously through your other groups. So the finance scrutiny is doing a whole lot of sessions looking at the different the areas and putting us on the spot. So feed in through those as well if you like. But as we say, there's lots of opportunities to continue the scrutiny of and the advice that you want to give to us about this budget, so please do continue with that. If we can move on to the forward plan of executive items now. You've all seen it, unless there's anything particular that you want to note from it. No, it looks like you're all happy, so we note that. And then if we can move on to the work programme, if we can, I think I haven't got it in front of me, so trying to move from one screen to another is I find it ridiculously difficult, which is silly. But I think we've got we've got 3 items
on screen for you.
Yeah, thank you, that'd be really helpful.
Just bear with me a moment.
I try not to print everything out, but I find it really difficult to flick between screens. I need to get more adept at it.
I've got it there if you want me to do it.
Yeah, go for it, David, please.
I've got it here. Sorry, I was just trying to make sure I got the right one, not the one that was half open.
Yeah. Excellent. There we go. So we've got the social prescribing and better care fund, which were postponed from the last meeting, so that's great. And then the community assets transfer policy that you highlighted you'd like to look at, because that's now been moved to the February meeting, so we've got a chance to look at that. Apparently that sits in Graham Lawman's portfolio, and he was happy for us to look at it in our EAP. So, and I asked David Brackenbury if it was going to his EAP, and he didn't seem to know. So I thought, well, we might as well get on and have a look at it in that case, since you've asked. So, if there's any comments on that, all is quiet.
Chair, just one thing. I got it on my other computer here. I agree with what you're saying. I just wonder when the integrated care system's coming back to us at some time in the future. That's my only question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, that's supposed to be becoming statutory organisation in April. So I wonder, David, if we can talk to Toby about coming and speaking to us. I don't know, so February, March, maybe.
Yeah, so I'd suggest February. So because we have to submit the final plans for the integrated care system to NHS England in February. So it's either one that you've got to squeeze into January, but it might be slightly too early because we might not have the feedback from. So we submitted our draft to NHS England. I want to say last week, but it might have even been this week, which just sets out things like the governance proposals, that side of things. So I'd suggest February would probably be a good date for us to focus on that.
Does that sound okay? Yeah, lovely. Okay, any updates or alerts, David?
So what I would say is there is lots of concern about the Omicron variant, the transmissibility of that, and what impact that may have within our hospitals over this sort of December-January period. We also have concerns about will that impact on our staffing within care settings. Because if it is more transmissible and we have a proportion of staff within those settings that haven't had their third booster, the ability of the people's bodies to fight the new variant dramatically increases with the third booster. So we are focusing on trying to encourage as many of our care providers staff to get their booster vaccination. It's not necessarily because they haven't got it. It may well be because they weren't in one of the earlier cohorts to be invited for their third booster. So I've only just had mine, my invite in the last week or so, because I'm in the 40 to 50 age group. But there will be oh God, that's scary when I say that. I'm actually going downhill now from 45 as well, so never mind. But we
don't go any further on the age thing.
But we obviously have a group of staff that will be under the age of 40, and whilst they may have been approached, they wouldn't have, whilst they may have been able to have got a booster, if they haven't received the text message from their GP or from or the message through the NHS app, it might not have triggered with them that they could get one earlier in that sense. But as a result of that, we are regularly planning with our health colleagues around contingencies and other mitigations that we can potentially put in place. There's always a little bit of a benefit to Christmas in that you tend to find that other people are on leave as well. So families can step in and do like to have their relatives more present. So that can take some pressure off our provider services. But it is something that we're monitoring closely moving forward. So I will keep obviously Councillor Harrison updated on any concerns that we have around that. But don't be surprised if you see comms going out looking for people to perhaps be on a volunteer register, that if we found that we had any care providers that were suddenly very short of staff and we needed people to go in and, you know, keep people company, make cups of tea for them, so that the care staff that are in there can focus on providing care, we may be sending some comms out to our wider workforce to that effect. So it's just to make you aware of that.
I think, David, as well, another sort of important development is perhaps the vote in the Commons last week to make vaccinations mandatory for both NHS and all care staff. And I think I saw the impact assessment of that, and I think it's quite alarming. And I think, you know, we're probably going to have to manage that very carefully.
Yeah, I mean, it's two things. I'm sure all of us can understand both arguments, both sides of the story. When you see some of the evidence around how transmissibility can be reduced by vaccinations and boosters, you understand it from that perspective. But I also understand it from the perspective of mandating a health treatment and the impact that has on people's individual rights to make a decision. Clearly the numbers in the report that Councillor Harrison's referring to are significant for frontline health workers, but we also know that whilst we got up to around 92-93% of care staff vaccinated in residential and nursing care homes, the rate in domiciliary care is considerably lower at the moment. And if that is genuinely because people are choosing not to be vaccinated, that could create a significant problem in February, which is when they need to have got their first vaccination by. Otherwise, they will not meet the timescale to be fully vaccinated by the start of April. So I have two views on it. One is, yes, it's right for people to get the vaccination because it protects others. But the second is my concern that I could end up with a sector that is saying, David, I'm going to lose 10% of my staff because I can't use them, or, you know, any range or percentage of staff between anything from 5 to 20% you could be looking at for certain providers. So we will continue that work to try and encourage vaccinations and support people to make those decisions and feel that they've been able to make the decisions themselves. We can't force them to get a vaccination, but what we can't do is allow them to work after the 1st of April in care settings, because that would be in breach of government legislation.
Yeah, thanks, David. Russell, you have your hand up.
Well, very quickly, I mean, I heard yesterday that a whole cohort of firemen and women went out in Kettering. The whole lot were wiped out, had to go home and isolate. But I think David's just covered it really rather well. He's very aware of it. Of course, he would be. And I like the idea of getting a whole set of people who will put their name forward to volunteer. I think that's an incredibly important thing to do. And what worries me now is after Christmas, the effect on schools.
Yeah, I think again we're probably waiting with bated breath to see what the government decides to do about schools, and any parent.
This pandemic is a beast.
Yeah, I think any parent is praying that schools won't be closed, but worrying that they might be.
You've put your finger on it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that is everything for today. So thank you so much. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, I really thoroughly appreciate and enjoy this panel. I think that you're a great group of people with lots and lots of passion and lots of views and thoughts. So looking forward to continuing working with you next year, and have a fantastic Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, Chair.